world needs few leaders and many followers. Thomas, however, was neither. He liked to read books in quiet and kept his thoughts to himself. Surviving at the orphanage means you have to either fight your way up or keep your head low. The latter approach came naturally to Thomas, but in the end, the loneliness of being in nobody's thoughts got a hold of him. He decided to leave the orphanage for good the day he turned 15. That day the weather was exceptionally dreadful, and a shred of doubt crossed his mind as he opened the gates of the orphanage. Thomas realized he had no plan and no place to go to, so he set foot to the first place he could think of, the ancient abbey that was just a few miles north of town. At least he could find shelter there. Thomas found more than shelter when the heavy oak wood doors of the abbey opened. The monks welcomed him and allowed him to live amongst them. There were 12 monks living in the abbey. Apparently, a 13th monk had died just days before Thomas's arrival. The monks told Thomas that a white rose had appeared in front of the bedroom door of the deceased monk exactly 40 days before his dying day. This miracle, the miracle of the white rose, had been happening in the abbey for centuries. Always exactly 40 days before the dying day of each monk that had lived in the abbey. As time slipped away, Thomas started to feel at home at the abbey. He was still sometimes plagued by dark thoughts and a sense of loneliness. But these thoughts came fewer and further apart because of the constant distractions offered by the daily routines in the abbey. The monks were friendly and hospitable, but still, Thomas was not sure if he liked his new home. Of course, he liked the study room and the enormous library, but the abbey gave him an uneasy feeling. Thomas couldn't help thinking there was something eerie about the abbey and its inhabitants. Besides a place for study and contemplation, the abbey was also a brewery. Although the beer was of decent quality, it would not leave the abbey. The beer, however, was not wasted, as the monks occasionally would drink huge amounts of their ale. They did not drink in a festive way, and there was little conversation while the monks continued drinking until some would hit the floor heavy with melancholy and unspoken memories. On such nights, Thomas preferred the solitude of his room. The two monks whose company Thomas enjoyed most were Brother John and Brother Alister. Brother John was very old. Through his parchment skin, the outlines of his skull were already visible. His body had weakened, and every movement caused him much agony. Therefore, Brother John had to carefully decide what things were worth the great effort of getting out of bed for. These things mostly comprised of getting food or his chamber pot. Thomas admired Brother John because, despite the many inconveniences he had to endure, he always showed great character and strength of will. Brother Alister was the most knowledgeable of the Brotherhood. The other monks respected Alister and every now and then would visit him for counsel. Thomas sometimes accompanied Brother Alister for a short walk through the graveyard. Death comes uneasy to the mind of men, Brother Alister said on one of those occasions. That is why people don't think of death. Even those that visit the graveyard don't think of death. They memorize the deceased. Death always comes too early, because people tend to believe their life is unfinished, or even wasted. That's why people fight death, and die with their hearts full of regrets. After a pause, Alister continued. If people would just accept that their lives do not serve any particular purpose, and that they can live out their lives happily, without any special obligations, death would be much easier to deal with. But surely, Thomas said politely, life must have a purpose. God must have a plan for us all. But the old monk said nothing and shook his head wearily. On another day, Brother Alister took Thomas aside to take him down a long spiral staircase to the Sanctum Sanctorum, as Brother Alister called the narrow, windowless room that lay hidden deep in the loins of the abbey. The chamber contained a heavy wooden table, with 13 candles of different sizes on top of it. Judging by the sweet smell the candles produced, they were made of beeswax. Each candle had a little paper note in front of it, with the names of each monk living in the abbey written on it in minute writing. Each candle is a life, said Brother Alister. If the candle is burned up, the life it represents ends. This one is mine, said the old monk as he pointed out a mid-sized candle on the table burning with a weak flame. The candle that burns half as bright burns twice as long, said Alister with a slight smile. With a shock, Thomas realized that one of the larger candles on the table had his name in front of it. For a moment, it seemed as if Alister regretted bringing him to the Sanctum Sanctorum. Don't interfere with time given. There are fates worse than death, he whispered warningly. Some people are more popular than others. This continues even after their dying day. Thomas became aware of this because one of the graves with the name Niccolò engraved in it always drew many more visitors than the other graves. And those visitors were mostly girls. He figured Niccolò must have been a musician, as a violin was engraved into his headstone. Thomas developed a jealousy for Niccolò, as he was so much loved. He realized that he was still not able to reach the level of happiness that was expected of people his age. But Niccolò had it easy. It should be me, he thought. It should be me. Thomas was intrigued by the graveyard as it was beautiful as well as unnerving. The monks never seemed to spend time cleaning or restoring the graveyard, but still, the paths were clean and the grassy fields were always perfectly trimmed. During winter, green grass and flowers would lay hidden beneath the snow. The black earth surrounding the graves was full of century-old bone fragments that would sometimes surface after a rainy day. During the nights, the air seemed to be filled with whispering voices that merged with the sound of the rustling leaves of poplars and willow trees. When Thomas lay in bed, his mind would often drift away towards the graveyard, and the neighboring willow trees whispering without him, and to the cold dark pond at the center of the graveyard, silently waiting for him in the silver moonlight. It was as if the graveyard was calling him. On one of those restless nights, he left his bed as he had decided to go to the graveyard to visit Niccolò. He felt he needed to do this, to stop this strange jealousy for this deceased musician and the unnatural fascination he had for the graveyard. It was only a short walk to the grave of Niccolò. Digging up the coffin, however, took a lot longer, as Thomas needed to dig quietly, as he did not want to be discovered. After 3 hours of careful digging, finally, the lid of the coffin was unearthed. As Thomas opened the coffin, using his shovel as a crowbar. Nervously, he started to examine the contents of the casket. With a shock, Thomas realized Niccolò was still handsome. With black wavy hair, high cheekbones, and a perfect, albeit pale skin. Thomas contemplated what to do next. But then, just when Thomas was about to grab the shovel again, Niccolò opened his mouth and slowly inhaled the damp air of the graveyard. He began to speak with a croaky voice.
Don't wake me, because I am not sleeping.
The eyes of Niccolò remained closed, and he did not breathe in again. Horrified, Thomas quickly closed the lid, covered the molded coffin with black earth, and ran back to the abbey. Could this be what Brother Alister meant with a faith worse than death? Days later, Thomas again awoke from a restless sleep in the middle of the night. When he passed the door of Brother John to get some water, he saw a white rose in front of Brother John's doorstep. Quickly and without thinking, he took the rose and placed it in front of his own door. After that, he went back to his room. Lying on his back, he stared at the ceiling for hours, his heart beating restlessly. When Thomas arrived late for breakfast the following morning, all eyes were upon him. Brother John looked beyond miserable, and Alister gave him a look that was hard to fathom, somewhere in between unbelief and anger. Did Alister understand what he had done? From the silent looks of the monks, he understood this was for real. From that cursed day on, only 40 days and 40 nights would remain him. The next day, Thomas was sitting in the early morning sun, watching the small pond that was located at the center of the graveyard. Then he saw her. A young girl in a white dress, dancing alone on the grass as if she was surrounded by music only she could hear. She was a vision of grace and beauty. Thomas couldn't help approaching her. When she saw Thomas, she walked towards him and politely introduced herself as Dora.
My name is Dora. I have a flower in my hair. I like to run through the wet grass. I like to sing and shout.
I'm not a brave man. I
trees are shaking, but not of fear. It's like I've missed you all these years. I've run from the devil, I've run from myself. May I run with you, sweet lady in white, and leave all thoughts behind.
She gave him a friendly and curious look that encouraged him. "You must be here because of Niccolò," said Thomas, because most girls were. "No," said Dora. "I am here because this is the first place I could think of, and because it is so beautiful and peaceful here." The following days Dora kept returning to the abbey. Each day Thomas spent with her was filled with happy excitement, and every morning Thomas couldn't help but smile, as he was in such sweet anticipation of meeting her again. This time Thomas had already thought of some interesting anecdotes he could bring up that Dora might like. They had been sitting at the side of the pond for only a few minutes, but even before Thomas could formulate the first sentence, he felt the warmth of her hand on his hand, and it felt for Thomas as if a rose unfolded in his loins. The feeling extended to every inch of his body and made him shiver. She looked at him with a longing in her eyes Thomas had never seen before. The sweetness of it all lay heavy on his stomach, but Thomas also felt a stabbing pain as he realized how little time he had. Thomas counted and realized only 36 days remained him, and that on one of those days he had to tell her. But then she kissed him, and all thinking came to a standstill as she placed his hands on her breasts.
The traces you leave are immortal, even when birth is reversed. The life you've lived will not be undone. The warmth of your hands will be fading to slightly warm up the earth. That warmth was yours. The earth was yours. We are born as strangers. And then we live and
Brother John felt terrible. The idea that life for him would never be again without agony was maddening. But no white rose would lay on his doorstep, silently waiting for him. On one night, the pain and suffering became unbearable, and Brother John grabbed a burning torch from the wall and left his room and slowly climbed down stair after stair. His left knee made a little cracking sound with each step. Why did he not think of this before? No more fear, no more pain, he whispered to himself. No more fear, no more pain. Alister, to hell with you and your rules! As the echoes of these words died out between the cold stone walls of the abbey, Brother John opened the door of the Sanctum Sanctorum, where it took a few minutes to think, and then he took one of the candles and stacked it on top of the candle of Thomas, as he blew out his final breath. And so, because of the selfish sacrifice of Brother John, the wasted years of Thomas were restored.